This is day 3 of the JunJul-87 7-day retreat. We don't need to talk. The talk yesterday about self-confidence, positive images and negative images, aroused a lot of concern in many people. And we continued discussing it in meetings. This question that we came to, whether there is any need for self-confidence at all. If the mind is clear to work within the given situation, which is also clear when the mind is clear in its facts. And the impact of the image which gives confidence or no confidence in our daily life. And as some people said, the utter uselessness of this image, if it is seen for what it is and what it does, how it clouds the issues, clouds what is going on. One may have a job here at the retreat, cleaning. Maybe someone else has the same job. One finds that when it gets done very quickly, another person may find not getting done at all in the time that is allotted for the job, not having it all done. And so quickly the image, I'm a fast worker or I'm a poor worker, which needs comparison to come to that conclusion. And of course the precedent, one may have thought about oneself in this way before. So why does one need to compare? Why does one need to make anything of oneself in addition to what is actually going on? The sweeping, the cleaning, the care given, which can only be given if the image does not threaten or beckon to get through quickly, to be good, or the fear of being judged slow, if it takes long. Someone else may not judge one, but we have introjected all of these others in ourselves, telling ourselves we're good or we're bad, slow, inefficient, or whatever. And then the emotions that are aroused, feeling proud or feeling depressed or angry, maybe angry with oneself. for being slower than others. All of it arising out of this extra, which the mind, the brain, fabricates from thought, from image, from memory, from comparison, from the past. When they have to cook some vegetables, maybe one's job. I'm just taking that as an example. And find the pot is too small, one has gotten this pot out laboriously, it's too small. So, is there immediately the judgment, I'm poor at this? Or will one put the pot back, dump the water out, take a new one, and proceed without self-judgment, without confidence or self-deprecation? Will one notice what is going on? Be aware of it. If the awareness is there, then one may see how utterly useless these images are, and yet how we feed on them. Always the yearning to be somebody important in one's job, and the fear of being a failure, and not only the emotions that go with it, but the isolation from each other. The job one does may be a unique function in a retreat or in the business, in a hospital. But that's the whole fact of it. It's the function it is. Maybe there's only one who performs it, maybe there are 20. But the mind makes something out of it. From goodness knows what past social pressures. There's tremendous yearning to be important, with which goes having an audience which sees one as important, appreciates one as important, and the separation that comes from that. On the one hand, wanting to be uniquely important and seen as such. On the other hand, the sorrow of feeling distant from people. One can't have both. They don't go together. Closeness and feeling of importance. I'm just using that thing of feeling importance. The other side is feeling so utterly unimportant in what one does, so worthless. And with this also the isolation, the self-isolation from each other through image and emotion and the feeling this is me. And this process goes on in all of us. Everywhere. Timelessly. If it's not one image, it's another. But image making is going on, and the isolation and separation that it brings about among us human beings. Antagonism, envy, jealousy, all of it, anger. It can be observed in a single moment. On the job, in the family, wherever. is so utterly important to watch it, to become aware of it, and have no attitude toward it, to remain open, not conclude anything from it. Because the moment the mind closes up again because it concludes, it ceases to see. Attention is over and the mind stuff of the past continues. Thoughts, judgments, reactions. And the feelings that go with it. One person said it's so amazing and not having been to retreat for a while and just to realize how one forgets about all this and doesn't look at it. What this me is. It takes it so for granted when one lives in these images and the pain, hurt, or pride that they produce, the attachment to these feelings. And yet it can be seen as that's maybe the only magic there is, that there can be insight into thought, into habit. The source of it all. I just recently received a letter from someone who attended a retreat maybe a year ago. It was the first retreat for this person. Came out of the retreat very enthusiastic. Wanted to do transcriptions, maybe translations of talks. And then found herself completely forgetting about the whole thing. Pushing it aside, not wanting to think about it anymore. And she didn't think about it anymore. It was as though it had never happened. And then about 6 months later, some statement heard in a talk about the self being just an accumulation of images and fantasies popped up in the mind. And with that, a realization that much of what had been considered her identity was just that. And the outdatedness of it, of these images, the inapplicability to this present moment of these images which had held such a sway, to which there had been such an attachment. And she writes, with the dropping off, nothing took its place. And it didn't seem frightening or anything special. And she continues, I don't really quite know who I am anymore. But that doesn't bother me either. So maybe one hears something said, it sounds outrageous or startling, frightening. But somehow or other, it has been heard. There was the openness to hear. Sinks in. Just because one doesn't understand something doesn't mean it can't be heard. Thought may not be able to resolve it. And it doesn't have to. It can't. It has to be seen. And then one says, well, what is that seeing? Tell me, how can I see? What do I have to do to see? or to listen with this openness which has no resistance in it. Just listen. There's nothing to be done. What can thought do about that? It can say it's raining or it's raining hard and go on spinning a story about it, explanations of, but that's not what's happening. You see that? What's happening cannot be captured by thought. Thought is something different. You can see that. The thought rain, and how good it is to have rain, or maybe it's flooding or so, these are all apart from what is actually going on. And if one sees that the word rain, lots of rain, or cloudburst, whatever word comes up, if one sees that that is a word, then one doesn't confuse it with the reality of it. Can one see that the word rain is not what is actually happening? And if one becomes more and more involved with a word and the ideas about it, the projections about it, then one doesn't hear what is actually going on. And it's the same with oneself. One is involved with the self-image to enhance it, to establish it, to maintain it, to get a better one, a more confident one. How can one see what is going on in oneself? The feelings of inferiority, of insecurity, loneliness or lack. And those feelings also can't be felt if one clings to these labels which were just given. Because a feeling of loneliness or lack is not just the word. Take the word away, what is it? The reality of it. And can one be in touch with that? Live with it. Live in touch with it. Rather than charging the brain with finding a confident self-image. Somebody said, isn't it a fact It started this way. The person was surprised to hear that one may be attached to the self-image of being a victim. If I remember correctly, please, we'll take it as a new situation. Being attached to the image of being a victim. And the logical, what we call the rational mind, how rational it is we can discuss some other time. Because can really only be rational if what is thought is based on fact. But a lot of our rationalism is based on ideas, which may not correspond to any facts. So, going back, the rational mind may say, it makes no sense to be attached to self-image of being a victim. Will one stop there and say it doesn't make any logical sense, it would be crazy, or will one watch oneself? Maybe not intend to, but maybe suddenly at a moment of feeling so victimized, there'll be some realization of what is going on, how one clings to that identity so easily. And not to think about why does a human being do that, but to watch it. What is in it for one in this feeling of victimization? One can feel sorry for oneself, which we all love doing, from habit. I don't know what all the feelings involved are. I can't verbalize them right now, but one can watch it. One can blame somebody else, and direct one's anger and frustration at the other or the others, which brings release, some kind of release of tension to blame others, to feel exploited and blame the exploiter. There is a certain pleasure in that. And it is, for so many human beings, such a repetitive pattern of finding situations and relationships, work conditions in which one is the victim. This image, the image has the power of creating a situation in which it fits, it can live on as that. Its origins may lie way back in our earliest childhood. We've all been victims to one extent or other of our parents who have been victims of their parents. Victims meaning utterly, totally, completely helpless and utterly, totally dependent on these parents, for better or worse. Totally dependent on their moods, which all of us have. We went into a little bit yesterday. The purpose of the talks is not to think back and try to remember what happened to our childhood. Somebody asked me that, am I supposed to dredge up memories in which this image building or praising or so forth happened? One is not supposed to do anything here. It's not supposed to. It's not a supposed to place. The way we're relating now is a reflection of how we have related in the past. The whole past expresses itself in how we're relating now, and what images we're serving or milking or suffering from now. because the past is constantly repeating itself. Unless there's insight into it and a short circuit in this vicious cycle. So then the person asks, but aren't there factual situations in which one is a victim? We talked about the lack of law for women in this country, which I've only recently become acquainted with when a woman lawyer visited us here whose specialty is this thing. Legislation. The legislation in this country having been originally written by men and only mentioning men. Amendments, I don't remember it all. It was very interesting to listen. I can't recall it all. But there is legal victimization of women, minority groups in this country, and there's work being done to correct that. Slow work, because there's a lot of resistance against it, because all habit is resistance and investment. But it is happening. But let us suppose the Equal Rights Amendment or whatever legislation is necessary to append and amend, it was all there now. Will one be done with feeling victimized? And does it mean that men who have all these rights don't feel victimized? Of course it's not so. There is factual victimization, if we want to use that word, or injustice, which can be amended, sometimes it can't. Sometimes resistance right now in South Africa, resistance too great at the moment. But does one need to feel psychologically as a victim, even though the conditions in which one lives victimize one legally or socially, doesn't have the same rights, the same access, one is prejudiced against? We read, I don't know, a year ago or less than a year ago, we had 2 talks on a diary. The book was called An Interrupted Life by Etty Hillesum. A 2 years diary of a Jewish woman who lived in Holland. Was finally sent to the extermination camp and died there. And yet in reading this amazing diary, there was a mind that was clearing itself of all these psychological accumulations, freeing itself from any psychological feeling of victimization other than the bare facts that are recorded in the diary. Now the Jews have to wear stars, now they can't buy groceries anymore, now such and such, and it seems quite clear, she writes, that we are going to be annihilated. But there's no self-pity and no feeling of blame, of fault. It's a very, very broad human view, which happens when the small, narrow view of me and my images drops away. Then the vista is open and whole. And one sees the suffering of all human beings, the self-victimization because of clinging to the self, the images, ideas, the story of me and my life. When there isn't this narrowness of self-enclosure in image and emotions, and then there's also not the need to blame and find fault in others. And we truly understand that we're of one mind. And we understand the tremendous power of conditioning everywhere, and the danger of it. I remember myself growing up being half Jewish, which was a disadvantage, felt as a considerable disadvantage in comparison to other children. I would have liked to do what others could do and couldn't. It was envy. Yet I remember very well how my sister and I would talk each other into how special we were. Very few were as special as we were. And taking great solace in that specialty. After the war was over and Americans conquered the city we're living in and then transported us along so the Russians wouldn't get us. Everybody was interested in scientists. There was a real looting going on of scientists. To the English zone, to the American zone, to the French. Not from those zones to those countries, and what was left, the Russians took. Scientists, that is. Nothing much more was left, in terms of goods. Then there were good ears. The Americans were interested in hearing stories of victims. And it was really good to be able to talk over and over about how victimized one had been and find a sympathetic ear. Also hoping now to what one hadn't had the privilege before, now to get the privilege, get a job in the military government, which we did as interpreters. We got special consideration. We're half Jewish, victims of the Third Reich. So we'll leave this question, whether, even though factually there may be injustice, which may or may not be mendable. Not all injustice in this world is mendable. Most of it is not. This is a fact that there is tremendous injustice as the world is right now, with all of our self-centeredness, individual or group-wise, clan-wise or race-wise, religion-wise or national-wise. All this makes for inevitable injustice, because there's no working together, no harmony in this at all, not possible. So finding oneself a victim of injustice, which is not mendable at the moment, I'm not saying put up with it, accept it, because who is there to accept it? That's again me. The idea that there's someone who accepts something about herself. There's only what is. And to see that factually, clearly, without the superimposition of the suffering image. And to see how that happens, as it happens, and be done with it before one starts milking the rewards from even the most miserable image. That one of the rewards, that one is something. But we don't have to be anything. Is that frightening? That we have a job or a certain position, function, that's a fact, but it doesn't need to make me into anything vis-a-vis all the other people. Because with that, sorrow starts again. The separation. This takes real, clear alertness to what's happening in relationship. These things reveal themselves in relationship, and then of course alone as one is mulling over one's sad fate or one's fortunate fate. To be alert. We talked about it yesterday. When one feels hurt, to take that hurt as an alarm signal to watch what it is that is getting hurt, who it is that is hurt. To observe self-image. Not to repress the hurt. That's, if it's there, then to feel it. Not to squelch it. Nothing is to be squelched, but everything to be felt and let go. And in the complete feeling of it, the complete seeing or experiencing of it, to be done with it. So it doesn't have to be carried around as a baggage. And then whoever said what about me or so, it's finished. One is free to meet that person again freshly. In talking about this, somebody said, we were sort of moving along together on this whole thing, somebody said, then there is really actually no forgiveness, is there? Is there? Is there a necessity for forgiving? When you see what happened, it's clear. Person said what he said or what she said. One knows those moments of saying things very well oneself. There's anger or no clear perception when it's caught up in something and blames somebody or hurts somebody. We all know it. We all do it and it's done to us. So if there's clarity about it, if the situation is seen, maybe in retrospect, maybe not at the moment, but afterwards one looks at the whole thing and sees how it all came about, it's clear and it's finished. Then who has to forgive whom? We can have a huge forgiving party where everybody's forgiving everybody. We're all doing the same things, don't we? On the receiving end and on the dishing out end. Unless there's some awareness before this whole cycle starts up again, then it doesn't have to start up. Then a word or a statement which is almost to come out, doesn't come out. Sometimes we say these statements before we say them. It can be seen at a glance, and the uselessness of it or the harmfulness of it, hurtfulness of it. And it doesn't need any tongue biting or control. Seeing it is enough to stop it. We're not talking about control, suppressing, because it doesn't work. It works in a way, but then it's like volcano underneath. Plates moving, and when the plates really move, there's tremendous eruption. Either tremendous eruption of rage and anger, or underhandedness, indirection, through the back door. If one sees an image and finds one can't let go of it, won't let go of it, there's such attachment, and one will deny the insight, deny the awareness, go on with the image, the pleasure of it, the pain of it. That happens too. It doesn't have to happen, but it happens. We may say, I'm confused. It doesn't make sense. You say if the image is seen, it should disappear, but it is going on. One isn't observing carefully the whole thing, that one is using it, needing it, attached to it. And I'm not saying one shouldn't be attached, but if one is really interested and not just brush over it by saying I'm confused, it doesn't make any sense. One can do that too. It's all right. But if one is really interested, one has to observe deeply where our needs arise. And dig that source. Be with it. Wonder about it. Sit with it. Walk with it. Live with it. It isn't immutable. That's the amazing thing. No matter how solid it is, the sense of self is not immutable. And by this I don't mean change it into some other sense. It's empty-outable. Because it's nothing. Not that I become nothing, that's thought. It's just nothing, nothing. And the drips. Movement of the leaves. Beating of the heart. With no need to make anything out of that. Because all of that too is not a thing. Does the thought start up, I want that, or I don't have that? That's a thought. What is the I that wants that or thinks it doesn't have that? Thoughts, images, and their continuity. And the feelings connected with it. Seeing that is not thought. That's not thought. we will end here for today.